Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is listening beyond the sound bites. Ben Kinsley is not joining us this evening, but with me is Representative Cynthia Browning. Cynthia, welcome.
Thank you so much.
So Cynthia represents Bennington 4, and you can do the laundry list of towns that includes.
All right, it's Arlington, Manchester, Sandgate, and most of Sunderland.
Excellent. We were just talking about people in Northeast Kingdom have 6 and 7 towns because you have to come up with about 4,000 people, right?
Yes.
So Cynthia's been on the show before, but I invited her back because there's been some changes in her life in the legislature, and she's always very active, and we wanted to hear what she had to say. And I will tell you that she is one of the best legislators in the State House, and I'll read you a quote that I found in the Manchester Journal. She said, "I work hard to analyze issues independently in developing and evaluating policies and deciding how to vote on bills." So you're an independent Democrat. Is that such a phrase?
That is correct.
Works for me. I think it's great. And she said, she went on to say, "I know that everyone will not agree with my decisions, but I hope that they know that I always have reasons for my vote, and I always need to hear criticism, comments, and suggestions." And I think that's perfect. I think if you can explain, even if people don't like your vote, if you've got a rationale and can explain it to them, they're usually fine with it. They give you the benefit of the doubt, and they seem okay, because I've done that once or twice in my past, and they're, well, why did you vote yes or no? And you explain it, and they go, oh. So there you go. Yeah. So you know that we ask our guests to talk about themselves when you first come on, so jump right in.
All right. Well, I do represent those towns. I should say it's a 2-seat district, so it's actually 8,000 people. So there's 2 representatives from that 2-seat district. And I've been in the legislature. I was first elected in 2006, and it has been one of the most rewarding things I've ever done in my life, and one of the most difficult things I've ever done in my life. And I really do try to analyze things and develop my own opinion. I don't vote according to how I'm told. I try to speak truth to power, and I try to do that regardless of party, because I feel that if I don't criticize my own party when I think they're wrong, I don't have any credibility when I criticize another party. So I really feel that I work for my constituents, not any party. I'm a Democrat, and I believe in democratic goals and values, but most importantly, the policies we put in place have to work. So they have to be based on how things really work, not rhetoric or wishful thinking or something that sounds good. So sometimes I get in trouble really with both parties because I kind of insist on that. And politicians like to do things that sound good, and they don't always know if they're really going to work because they may not really understand it. So it's not that I'm smarter than other people, but I do have a degree in economics. So it's sort of like I have a different training. And this really helps in the legislature because there's a lot of figures, there's lots of statistics, and I'm not dependent on anybody to tell me what they mean, although that can help.
Right.
But I have an ability to analyze them independently, and I think that really helps me. That's what I feel is one of my unique contributions for my district.
I agree. You just remind me, the first day or first couple of days you were in the legislature, you stood up and completely blasted a telecommunications bill, which was being pushed by the Democrats.
Yes.
And we're all sitting there, and it was like watching deer in headlights. Everybody's going, whoa, who is this woman? We were very impressed.
But actually, that was like after 2 months.
Oh,
I was quiet
it?
for several months. And then I got up and I just said, this is not going to work. And by the way, 10 years later, do we have complete coverage of telecommunications? No, we do not.
I rode up to Lyndonville yesterday to have lunch with friends, and it's an hour-and-a-half trip for a whole hour, no coverage. It was incredible.
Yeah, I mean, and the cell phone coverage is not even as crucial as the internet service.
Yeah, no.
The internet service needs to come first, but the cell phone service is really crucial too, and we still don't have it. And so I think I was right that bill was not going to work.
Yep, you were. I just remember, and you talked a long time, and we're all like, holy mackerel.
I did.
We love this woman.
I don't think
so
I was saying it.
You used to be on corrections and institutions for most of that time, and now you've switched to Ways and Means, which we'll talk about, but you are still on the House Rural Economic Development Working Group. And could you talk a little bit about that? Because you said a degree, but you actually have a PhD in economics.
Yes. And I think that's a very important group, because when you look at Vermont as a whole, we have a relatively low unemployment rate, which is good, and we have a pretty good rate of economic growth, and that's good too. But when you look below the statewide numbers, you find out that the state is really bifurcated. And there are certain parts of the state, the Chittenden County area and the Upper Valley area, that have really low unemployment rates and are really growing quickly. And then other areas of the state,
Right.
Bennington area in my southwest corner, the Rutland area and the Northeast Kingdom, that have high unemployments and are not growing
Right.
quickly. So those really are the small town and rural areas by and large, not always. I mean, really, compared to most states, all of Vermont is really small down.
Exactly.
But so we're concerned that not enough attention has been given to those areas, and it isn't just, oh, you need to help these areas. The other areas the state needs to help those areas, because if you don't, they're going to drag the whole state down. So we were just talking about telecommunications.
Right.
Telecommunications infrastructure, if you want to be able to sell a house and you don't have good internet service, let's say cell phone service,
Right.
because if you have good internet service, you can get an antenna on your house and you can have a cell phone. It's harder to sell your house and it won't sell for as much. If we want our small towns, if we want people to be able to run businesses from their
Right.
home, if we want kids to be able to do their homework, you need an internet connection. So the fact that we have not yet succeeded in pushing the high-speed coverage into all of the areas is a real problem. We've done a lot, and don't get me wrong, we have done a lot. The problem is the need for speed, so to speak, keeps ratcheting up
Right.
faster than we can do
Well,
it.
it's not economical for the telecommunications
Yes.
people to run a line
That's right.
when there's one house here and one
That's
house
right.
on the top of the
That's
hill.
right.
It doesn't pay.
That's right, and that's why we have organizations like EC Fiber, which is a nonprofit that works with municipalities. There are other organizations. The state has grants for Fairpoint or for Comcast to try to subsidize those extensions. Because remember, it benefits everybody on the network to get everybody on the network.
Right.
So it's worth that subsidy, and it will be worth it in terms of
I agree
economic
with you.
development. I mean, even this thing that the governor's idea about giving a tax credit to people who will come here and work remotely, there's been a lot of press coverage of that. That's only going to work if you got high-speed internet.
Right.
So he's talking about bringing people to live in places that already have that key infrastructure. You need to push that infrastructure out
Right.
further. So that's one of the key things that the Rural Economic Development Working Group talks about. We talk about the water and sewer problem. We need investments in water and sewer, just basic transportation. And then there are educational issues as well, because Act 46 was not necessarily kind to some of the smaller
Right.
rural districts.
Right.
So,
Oh, we hear that.
yeah.
Yeah, I know there's a woman in Berlin, lives right on top of this hill I was just talking about, and she's an insurance agent and works from home. She mostly has to go into town to work in the library,
Yes.
or what do they call it, downloading, or what do they,
Wi-Fi or
Wi-Fi,
downloading?
yeah, she downloads, I mean,
Yeah.
it just takes her
And
forever.
she downloads it and then goes home or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
And see, it's really what has happened is we've had better and better coverage in the areas that already have good coverage instead of the extensions of fiber into the hinterlands.
Right,
We're gonna have to do that. And I
Yeah.
think everybody knows that. It's a matter of money and time. But I think there are partnerships, there are grants, but that is the key thing.
Yeah,
for
I think this
economic
phrase "last mile" is a little disingenuous. It's more like the last 10 miles or 100. So anyway, you are now on Ways and Means, and
Yes.
maybe we could talk about what is Ways and Means and what are they responsible for, and
Sure.
what happened this year, because
Sure. Those are great questions. Ways and means refers to how you raise the revenue to do things. So it's the ways and means of doing things. And as a matter of fact, it's a term from Britain from the 1600s.
Oh, I didn't know that.
From Oliver Cromwell's first rump parliament during, after the English Civil War.
Oh, cool.
That they came up with the parliament. They had a special committee about ways and means when they were raising taxes. So it's actually kind of an archaic expression, and that's why it sounds so weird. So House Ways and Means is responsible for setting any kind of fee, like a fee for getting a license or registration, any kind of fees and taxes, and any bill that affects the revenues of the state has to go through
Right,
that
Ways and
committee. But the thing that you think of it mostly is if you're going to have any changes in the income tax rate or setting the property tax rate every year, that all has to go through Ways and Means. So it's an incredibly important committee.
Yeah.
And I am so grateful that I finally got there, because a lot of the time I was on institutions, which is also a wonderful committee, I was coming up with tax reform proposals. And I did a lot of work and I read the reports, but it's very different when you're in the committee and you have a
Right,
chance to
right.
ask the specialist questions.
Right.
It's just really, really powerful. And I give the current speaker a lot of credit for putting me there, because I didn't get there by always voting the way my party told me to.
Right.
I got there because people said, well, she's one of the few people that seems to understand this and have some ideas about it,
Right.
so we have to put her there. So I give them a lot of credit, and I worked really hard to be constructive and to make positive suggestions and not be too disruptive, although that might have tailed off every once
It's in
in a
your
while.
genes,
Yeah.
I think. But anyway, and Ways and Means, any increase is really intended, if I remember correctly, to cover the expenses. Like if you raise DMV's fees, it's supposed to really reflect the raised
Yes,
costs
yes.
in the DMV department. It's not supposed to just be raised just
No,
because.
no, and that's a really good point, because if you have, stormwater permit fees for A&R, or getting your license renewed at DMV, or if you are an electrician paying your license fee, those fees are supposed to cover the cost of
Right.
that regulatory program. You're not supposed to just be raising extra
Right,
revenue.
right.
So it's sort of like a user cost. So it's different from taxes.
Right.
Because if you're not an electrician or if you're not getting a stormwater, you're not going to pay those fees because you're not using that regulation.
Right.
Now, licenses, yes, we're all going to get our license and
Right.
registration, but so it's definitely supposed, and you're supposed to have a fee bill every year and review 1/3 of the fees and adjust
Right,
them.
it's a
'Cause if
cycle
you
of
don't,
time, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a cycle, and if you don't adjust them, what can happen is, state employee salaries, compensation rightly grows over time.
Right.
So if you don't adjust the fees, sooner or later, you're not able to cover the cost of the program. So you definitely want to watch it. You don't want them to get out
Right.
of control. But the governor did not have a fee bill this year because he
Right.
didn't want to
And
increase
last
any
year
fees.
too, right?
Last year there was a tiny one, but it mostly lowered fees.
Oh.
So, and I understand why, and I really honor his desire to, keep things under control. But we are going to have to do that next year,
right.
but we're just going to have to be very careful about
Yeah.
it. But the taxes, you don't usually change income tax rates very often. This year we did, which was a big deal. But you always have to set the property tax rate, and you often have little fiddling around the edges, which sometimes is significant because sometimes you create a new tax provision that serves just a particular group.
And who sets the rate? I mean, the legislature does, but is it out of your committee?
The property tax
The property
rate?
tax.
Yes.
Oh, it
It
is.
starts in our
Why
committee.
didn't I know that? Shame on me. I just know, I would say the legislature sets it, but it's Ways
Well,
and Means.
everybody has to vote,
Yeah,
but it
right.
starts in our committee.
Right.
But we work with the Education Committee pretty closely because the responsibility for that rate, it has to do with education costs, so it's like a joint responsibility.
And you must have been very involved in Act 46 in your committee, were you not? Or you yourself were involved in Act 46?
I was involved in it. I was still on corrections and
Oh, I
institutions
see. Of course.
then, and I opposed it. Not that I don't want everybody to merge. If they see benefits to merge,
Right.
they should be merging and they should get incentives and be rewarded. But I didn't like the mandates, and I didn't like, I don't like forced mergers, and I didn't like the fact that they designed it so that the cost of the merger incentives was paid for within the education fund. If you merge, you get a reduction in your district
Right,
property
right.
taxes. The cost of that is borne inside the education fund. So that cost actually drives up the property tax rate.
Of course.
So in other words, if you think you're going to get an 8-cent property tax rate this year, you're not. You're getting 6.5 because the total cost of those incentives is $14 million. That's $0.015.
Yeah.
So I thought that this was a state priority, a state mandate. The state should have put money in to cover it, and they didn't. And so I really opposed that, and I opposed the forced, the mandated mergers. And
A lot of people listening will be loving you right now because they think
well,
that created all kinds of
but the
discussion.
thing that's really a problem is all these issues were evident then, and they jammed it through.
Right.
And I think it was a mistake because there are many places that merged, and God bless them. I hope it all works out. But there are places that can't merge. They don't have partners.
Right.
And they're ending up paying for other people's mergers.
Yeah.
And there are some districts like, Burlington or Rutland. They're already a union school district. They can't
Right.
merge.
Well, so are we
they're
too.
paying the
Right.
merger incentives for other people.
So U32 must be doing the same thing. Yeah.
And see, that's wrong. You shouldn't be paying for someone else's merger incentive if you can't merge. And if you've been promised an incentive, you should get the incentive you were promised, not $0.015 less. And it really grieves me that I was not able to make that case strongly enough to stop what was happening in the legislature.
Wow.
But you have to raise these issues. I don't always change the direction of things, but I raise issues, and sometimes you can come back and correct it later.
Maybe after they've been through this exercise, they will do some rethinking.
Well, actually, the money that we're getting ahead of ourselves, but that some of the extra revenue that's being put in the Ed Fund this year, you can see that as covering the cost of the merger incentive.
Yeah, that was quite a boon there, unexpected revenue.
Yeah.
That was good. Kept you all there for a few weeks, but we'll get to talk about that in a minute. So you didn't have a fee bill this year. So what was the focus of your committee?
Oh my God.
Yeah, really.
We did two things, and one of them we really did, and one of them we're going to have to take it incomplete. The one that we really did had to do with the income tax reform.
Right.
Now, usually you don't fool with the income tax very often. You set the rates, and then every year, based on economic activity and how much people's income are, they pay certain percentages, and you live within that revenue, along with the other sources of revenue. So you just set the rates and leave it alone. But this year, we couldn't do that, even if we would have wanted to, because the Federal Tax Cut and Jobs Act, which was passed in December, made changes that affected Vermonters' tax liability, because Vermont's tax code was linked directly to the federal tax code. And if we had done nothing, Vermonters would have paid $30 million more in taxes. And most of that would have been on sort of like middle-income Vermonters with kids.
Excellent.
And we couldn't, that was intolerable. That was intolerable. So what we did is we separated the Vermont tax code from the federal tax code. We simplified everything. You have a Vermont standard deduction, a Vermont personal exemption, itemized deductions go away, there's a charitable tax credit. We did reforms that make it a lot simpler. The form's going to be simpler, and we avoided that tax increase, and we made it so that if the feds do anything screwy in the future or anything good in the future, Vermont can decide what they want to include.
Great.
So that was really astonishing, and the fact that, and that was what the press conference that I was at today was about, because...
talk about that a little bit, because you attended Governor Scott's press conference.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. And the income tax reform parts, the administration made a proposal, and then the legislature changed it and fooled around with it. But ultimately, we ended up really very close and compromised on it. And it's really good. We made it simpler. I think we made it more progressive. It was just, I think it was a success.
That's great.
And his press conference, it was his weekly press conference, but he was just kind of trying to highlight those changes and make sure people were aware of it. One of the things we did was to expand the exemption of Social Security benefits from taxation, which is really important. And we also expanded what's called the Earned Income Tax Credit, which goes to working Vermonters, which gives them a refundable tax credit based on what they're earning. And that, I believe that expansion of that credit will do more to help low-income working Vermonters than the minimum wage increase. So I think would have, because the minimum wage increase, some people will lose their jobs, they'll lose hours, they'll have to pay more in taxes, they'll lose benefits. So it's very uncertain how that would work out. But the Earned Income Tax Credit, if you're working for the minimum wage, we just made it better for you. Not a lot, but we made it somewhat better. And so I'm very proud of that. That's
great. Good for you. That's great. Do you have somebody in Ways and Means that takes all these ideas and does the calculations? And because you threw out a lot of changes, and at the end of the day, how does everything intertwine? And at the end of the bill, it's going to be good. I mean, all of it's going to. Who does that? Is that Joint Fiscal?
Yeah, the Joint Fiscal Office is the office that works for the legislature to figure out if we say, okay, we want to do X, they go in and they figure out, well, if you do X to the tax code, what is it going to happen?
Right, the domino effect,
yes,
right?
so we have experts that look at that analyze it. So you say, we want to do X, oh wait, we want to do X plus 1, and then they'll do that run. So they're fantastic. And then we also have people in the tax department, working for the administration.
Right.
So when the administration had its proposals, it had its analysis, and then we had our proposal, and JFO had our analysis, and then they sort of merged and came together and agreed on the numbers, and it was a fantastic process, and we could not do our work without those staff. They're just marvelous.
Because I think just being on Ways and Means, you've got to have a basic understanding of all this stuff, and it's a hard committee to be on without some kind of knowledge or background.
Well, I think that usually people get there after they've been there a while, or they do have some knowledge or background that would make them
Right.
appropriate to be there. But they do like workshops for us. They give us memos. They give us
great.
tutorials. There's lots of things to read. There's big reports to read. It all depends on how studious you want to be and where you want to go with it.
Good.
And I think that, I mean, I've studied in economic graduate school. You studied what is a good tax code supposed to look like.
Really?
What are the principles of taxation? So I'm coming from that framework and applying it to our tax code. And so you
Well,
can
I'm glad
see,
you're there. God, I couldn't do it. I know some. I don't know. It was mentioned at one point in time. I went, oh no, thanks. No, that's okay. That's good. So, there's been a couple of proposals, and Janet Ansell's name was in the paper with some other proposals, whether flat tax or just really some dramatic changes.
Yes,
and
that was-
and that all sort of
yeah,
went away.
yeah.
I think
That's the incomplete part.
Yeah.
So we did this income tax reform, which we had to do because we had to do it because we couldn't let Vermonters have a tax increase we
Right.
didn't plan. So we had to do that, and I think we did it in a good way. And there'll certainly be things that'll be tweaked in the future.
Right.
But I think the administration and the legislature have reason to be proud of what was done. Education finance, we considered on Ways and Means very ambitious and aggressive different reform proposals, like making it so that when you pay your education property tax, instead of paying for education through a property tax, it would have been partly a property tax and partly an income tax. So we had this hybrid kind of thing. And it was all after trying to get at the fact that people's ability to pay is really related to their income more than always their property value.
Right.
So we have a
That's the truth.
complicated system because we've got this property tax, but then we have a way of giving people rebates and support and credit. So and that's based on income. So it's really complicated. So we went through in the House, we actually passed a version of that, which with an education income tax as well as the property tax. And I had very mixed feelings about it, but I felt like it moved the conversation forward, and it was worth talking about. So we passed that, and then the Senate just said,
no.
we're not going to do that. And I don't think the administration would have done it anyway. But it was sort of partly, there were a lot of things in the proposal, and we were trying to move the conversation forward.
So is there any committee this summer that's working on it to get a new proposal for January?
There's legislation that is going to set up another blue ribbon tax commission,
good.
but they won't have to report for like 2 years.
Okay.
But education finance is one of the things they're going to look at, but I'm not waiting. I mean, one of the reasons I'm up here today is to meet with you, but once I knew I was going to talk to you, I made appointments with people, tax experts, to talk about my proposals. I'm going to be submitting bill draft requests even before the election, and if I don't get reelected, I'll hand them off to somebody else.
Good.
But I think you're right. We need to with something this complicated, we need to start earlier, and I think we need to do it in a different way. I think the problem with when you think of the problem of why we have high property tax rates and why education costs so much, there's two components the way I see it. Part of it is how much the districts are spending. And they do need to moderate the growth of spending. We have fewer students, but this year it only grew by 1.5%, which is pretty
that's great,
good.
actually.
The other thing is there are state costs that have been put in the education fund that are not actually education.
Don't get me started on that, Cynthia.
Okay, well,
Yes,
I'm going to get you
know.
started on that because that's where I am.
Yes, right.
So you're not the problem of high property taxes is partly because of education spending, but it's partly because the state has put the cost of supporting homeownership in the education fund. It has put the cost of supporting agricultural and forestry in the education fund. Before Act 60, there was no education fund. Current use and homeowner rebates were items in the general fund budget.
Right.
And that's where they need to go back.
And may I tell you, when I was in House Education, they put in a paragraph for me, otherwise I wouldn't sign on to the bill. And it was supposed to be a summer study of how much money was in, and they did a draft, but they never let it out in final. They always kept it as a draft. It looked at all of the costs that are in property tax that should be really in human services. And it's mostly related to special ed. And not that I want anything to happen to the cost of, but it should be reflective so that people know we're spending this much on special ed and not hide it in, because you look up the definition of property tax, it's the value of the property.
That's right.
Ta-da.
And also, Act 60 says you can't use the education fund for anything other than pre-K through 12 spending.
Right.
Boom.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to use it for agriculture. You're not supposed to use
Right.
it to subsidize.
Right.
All of those are
Public
good
safety
things.
was used.
All of those are good things. We should have support for agriculture and forestry and support for home ownership, but it should be in the general fund.
And it should be transparent. They're always talking about transparency.
Yes.
You
And if
should
you
know.
want to try to find out the cost
Good.
of some of those things, it's not easy.
Right.
So, but we did actually take some of the things, some things that districts never vote on, that they're kind of tangentially related to education, but not really. We took them out of the education fund this year, but we took the money out too.
Right.
So it's not like taxes are going to come down. But still, it's good to get things that the districts are not voting on or that are not directly related to education. It's good to get it out. And you should know that we did pass a special education reform bill.
Oh, yes,
that is supposed to eventually sort of mitigate the rate of growth.
Because they could have property tax down in 2 seconds if they move those things where they're supposed to be.
But
and
remember, the
accurately
other
reflect
thing
them.
about special education, that was a federal mandate to have that level of special education, and I don't begrudge that because all
No,
those
me
children
neither.
need it. But they promised at the time it was passed, they promised that they would pay for part of it, and they don't.
didn't. Oh,
They didn't.
lovely.
That's why Jim Jeffers left the Republican Party, because they preferred tax cuts to the rich
Right.
over funding special education. That's
Right.
my recollection. I may
Yeah.
have that
No, no.
wrong. You know, so
Yeah.
so the education finance reform, I think we fooled with a lot of different puzzle pieces, tried to rearrange it,
Good.
didn't get the right arrangement. But if I'm privileged to go back, I'm going to hit the ground running
Good for you.
and try to come up with another arrangement, because I think that we're seeing the source of the problems more clearly. And it has to start with what is. You can't say, well, we can't look at current use because that's agricultural and forestry. No, you have to look at it. My family has property that's in current use.
Right.
We have to look at it.
Right.
You know, so you can't be afraid of those things. Because if you support it, you'll find a way to support it. It's just a question of where it should be and how it should
Well,
be.
I hope it keeps up, because this year was a great discussion.
Yeah.
I mean, we had some alternatives, we had some different ideas, and people were talking about it
Yeah.
instead of just putting it on the back shelf, which is great. So I wish you a lot of luck with that one.
Yeah, I'm not sure luck's going to be enough.
Well, but if you talk about it over the summer and get people, when you're campaigning, just to get people to understand it, it's so complicated.
Yeah.
All I know is we got our tax bill and it's up this year, just to say.
Yeah, and sometimes you're kind of like, wait, our spending is down, how is this up? And that itself tells you something's wrong. Transparency and accountability. How can I vote on bills? How can school district voters vote for their budgets if they don't understand
Right.
how it connects to their tax
And they
rates?
don't.
And they don't. That itself is a violation of the democratic process.
Right.
Complexity itself is a problem. And I think what's happened is that property taxes and the ed fund have become a way to correct for all kinds of problems. Lots of problems need to correct for it. Can't use that tool. That's the key thing.
Interesting. Tom Pelham and I did about a couple of years ago questions to ask at town meeting about education. That was a great show. I should run that again. Just because people don't even know what to ask.
Right.
They don't even know
Right.
what they don't know. It's
That's
just
right.
so complicated. When somebody stands up there, it's like deer in headlight. You're like, what?
Yeah.
It's very complicated. Just make it simple. Keep it simple, stupid. Is
That's
that
right.
the KISS theory? So just switching hats a little bit. Oh, no, I wanted to talk about Social Security. Did you guys get involved in the
Yeah.
Social Security?
Oh,
I bet
yeah.
you did.
Oh yeah, and this is something that the governor proposed, expanding the exemption of Social Security benefits from taxation, and this is something that people have been raising for a while. And he included, I think, in like his State of the Union
Yes,
speech
right.
or some of the other things. The situation is that already, according to the federal law that passed through to Vermont, up to, I think it was $25,000 yearly income for a single person and $34,000 for a couple, that amount of Social Security benefits was exempted from taxation, and then it sort of phased out as you
Right.
had more. So people were already getting something, but there's been inflation, costs have gone up,
Right.
incomes. So what was happening is that more people were paying more taxes, and they're like, what's going on? So because those amounts had not been adjusted for inflation for decades.
Oh.
So what we did is we raised it, I'm going to try to get this right, from 25 to 45 for a single person and 34 to 65 for a couple. And then after that, you still get something, but it phases
Fades
out,
off,
it
right,
tails out.
right.
So what this means is that more of your Social Security benefits will be exempt from state taxation. It may still be taxed, it's federal, but from state taxation. And the governor had proposed phasing it in because, it's expensive. You're losing
Sure,
tax
it's
revenue.
gotta come from somewhere, right?
Yeah, but we actually did all of it this year because we were sort of like, we're going to do it, we're going to do it.
Right.
And then we had to sort of pay for it in the tax reform
Right.
process. But I think combined the change in the Social Security taxation, which helps retired people on fixed incomes, and the earned income tax credit, which really helps working Vermonters at the low end. Those are two changes in the income tax reform that really could help Vermonters.
Because some states just don't tax Social Security, period.
I know.
So we're
I
going to
know, but once
can
you
we
get
get
above
there somewhere?
once you get above 65,000 in income,
Yeah.
Do
you really
I mean,
need it?
see, the thing is, it would be nice not to tax it for anybody,
Right.
but then there are other things you're not going to be able to do.
Right.
So it's a question of how do you allocate that.
Because it's a real draw when people are moving.
I know that. I
and
know
they
that.
look for the
but if
states
you,
that
but
don't
if you,
charge it.
But if you look at things like that, sometimes
They make it up somewhere
they,
else,
they
right?
make it up somewhere else, or also, that isn't the only thing people look at. But it's true, there are lists of, where is the best
Right,
place to
right.
retire. But we have a lot of retirees coming to Vermont, so
Yeah, I find that,
Can't
well,
be.
we're still the oldest, or second oldest, or
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
So is there anything else in Ways and Means? Because I wanted to talk about the special session. But is there anything else that you guys did that you wanted to talk about?
No, I think that the income
Those are the
tax
key
reform
things.
was really solid. The exploration of education finance did not come to a final resolution, but the committees learned a lot. The body learned a lot, and it's an educational process because
Yeah,
you want
'cause you
people to
brought that
vote
to the
for
floor,
it.
right?
We brought it to the floor. So I think we have a foundation for going forward next year. And whether I get reelected or not, I'm going to try to be part of that conversation because I think I've gotten to the point where I understand the framework well enough that I can think about it creatively, because if you don't understand it, you can say, well, could you do this? But then it has its other effects.
It's always the domino effect that
Yes.
bothers me.
How do the puzzle pieces
Right,
fit together?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I worked with somebody who was so brilliant, but the person never thought about the dominoes, and they come up with an idea, and about 3 or 4 dominoes down, something
Yeah.
would blow up, and
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
not good.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the special session.
Special session.
I heard it was one of the most difficult sessions ever from people who have been in the legislature for quite a while and have been through the end of session days, and they said this was really awful.
It was really hard. First of all, I'll just back up and tell people why it was
Yeah, let's
different.
do that.
The question was not the budget. The budget was good. The Appropriations Committee did an excellent job. The rate of growth in overall spending was very moderate. Everybody liked the budget. Everybody liked the income tax reform. It was the question of the property tax rates, and in particular, how to use this extra revenue that the state was suddenly getting.
Right.
Because after, you have this forecast of the revenue and you design your budget to that forecast. And then as the fiscal year was winding up, we were getting these pulses of extra revenue that had not been forecast. And it actually, I think it may be a complex phenomenon, but a big factor is actually the same federal Tax Cuts and Job Act that we were talking about before, because some wealthy individuals and some big corporations can repatriate income and pay a much lower rate than they would have before. So they're doing it. And a tiny fraction, if it's a big corporation, a tiny fraction of that will come to Vermont.
Right.
And so we were getting, 10, 12, 15, 20, 30 million, it's going to end up being 68 million more than we thought. So we use some of it in very useful, intelligent ways, and, for things like mental health and opiate addiction and those kinds of things.
pension for
and
teachers.
And definitely you want to pay down unfunded pension liabilities. But the sticking point was that the legislature wanted to use all or most of it to pay down the pensions, and the governor wanted to use some of it to keep property tax rates level.
Right.
And there are arguments to be made for both of them, and we ended up doing some of both.
Right.
And by the way, doing some of both was something that was clearly possible at the beginning of that session.
Exactly.
But sometimes people can't do something that isn't what they want until the deadline is there, and I think that's what happened.
And there was a lot of downtime too while committees were meeting, and so the
Yeah.
body wasn't working.
So
on
they
things.
they ended up kind of splitting the pie, and I don't think it was a bad result. I would have liked to reduce non-resident tax rates a little bit more, which would have been going more towards the governor. But I think there's going to be extra revenue this coming year too because of these same phenomena. But we have to be careful how we use it. What I did is I linked using the extra revenue to these Act 46 merger incentives because those are short-term costs. So I said, you should pay the cost of the merger incentives this year and last year when you didn't cover it, and then you should put money into next year's pot to cover them next year, because it's 14 this year, it's going to be 14 next year. So then you're linking one-time revenue with a short-term thing, not ongoing. So, and they ended up doing something like that. They didn't put enough in next year, but that's a justification for what they did. That's the way I justify it, because that cost is going to go away. But the problem was, the thing that was different about this is, you may remember veto override sessions. Usually the governor vetoes something, and the legislature has set a date for the veto override, and they come back and either they try to override the veto and succeed or fail, or a deal is worked out and then you just pass the deal. That's what happened last year.
Right.
Between the veto and the veto override session, they worked out a deal and we voted on it.
Right.
We didn't do that this year. The legislature said, we're not setting a veto override session. It's up to the governor to call us back. And I'm not quite sure what led to that thing. So what that meant is the governor had to call us back, and the bills had to start in committee all over
Well, but it also
again.
meant that everything is on the table again.
Everything is on the table.
So they could
And
have
they did. They
taken
passed-
up everything.
And they
wanted.
did that. There were some
Yeah.
bills that had kind of died on the vine at the end of the
Yep,
session.
right.
They went ahead and passed them.
Right.
That may have been why they did it that way. There were some bills that they cared about, and so they went ahead and, I'm saying they, but I'm not part of leadership. So that may have been a reason to do it that way. But what it meant was you had to have bills starting in the committees again, and then moving to the, passing the
And
House
they
and going to the
renumbered them.
Senate.
It was
They
bill
renumbered. It was the
number
same
one.
bill. It was
Right.
the same bills,
Right.
but they renumbered it. And so we actually have passed the budget. We actually ended up passing the budget like 3 different times under
Yeah,
3 different
well, there
numbers.
was 1, 2, and 3,
nuts.
right? But
Yeah, it was
versions 1, 2,
nuts.
3.
It was nuts. But that's why. So like on Ways and Means, we were one of the key committees. So I was driving up to Montpelier, like at least twice a week, back and forth in the same day. Because it would be 2 separate days. You couldn't stay
right.
up. It was really arduous. I was trying to come up with creative ways to solve it. I was trying. I think the Act 46 one was a good one, but I couldn't really come up with anything else that was really good. And we just had to wait for the time to run out and for people to make a deal. But it got really messy at the end because of the way at one point it seemed like the House and the administration had a deal, and then that fell apart because the Senate didn't like it, and that was very unfortunate.
Yeah, because Mitzi, the Speaker, and the Governor agreed. They said,
That
we
is
agree
my
on this.
understanding.
And then the Senate Pro Tem, Senator Ash,
That is-
said nope, and the whole thing
Yeah.
just...
And I said on the floor of the House, I said, since when does the Senate
Right.
pre-veto
Right.
what the House is going to do?
Right.
And if you have an agreement between 2 of the bodies, then I think there's pressure on the other body
sure.
to come. But, there's complicated dynamics, there's personalities, there's a lot of politics.
Yes.
And it just...
Yeah, I heard it was very unpleasant, and people were a little surprised about just some of it. So.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's sad. So did you guys, one thing that we talk about a lot on this show is the Lake Champlain cleanup.
Yes.
Did anything happen this year
Yes.
with the Lake Champlain?
Yes.
Could you tell
Not
us
much, but something.
Did you take care of that in your... It was,
We addressed it. We didn't take care of it finally,
all
but
right.
I have some ideas. I always
Okay.
have ideas.
jump right in.
So jump right in. The water's fine.
Not so.
So the clean water initiatives are ongoing, and they are funded for the next couple of years. But, we've been using the regular budget allocations. We've been using allocations from the capital bill. That's the bonded dollars when you
Right,
borrow money and
right.
you allocate it. So we are funding cleanup projects for stormwater, for agriculture, for forestry, for whatever we need to do. But at some point, we're going to need a dedicated source of funding, because you can't take up so much of the capital bill forever. And the feds, the EPA, wants us to identify a sustainable source of funding.
Right.
So the legislature was sort of saying, well, we have to do this year, or at least put in place if we don't get anything, if we can't come up with anything else, we'll do this. And the administration said, no, we don't want to do that right now. And part of that is because, the governor had said no new taxes. He didn't even want to have a future tax. And I understand that. And you didn't need the revenue right now. You're going to need it in the future. So what the House ended up passing, which I did not support, was they allocated some of the unclaimed bottle deposits. Like if a tourist comes to Vermont and buys a bottle of Coca-Cola, they pay the bottle deposit, and then they leave and they just leave the bottle. They take the bottle with them, or they never go. No, that's not right. They never redeem the bottle deposit. They never return the bottle.
Left
So there's
in the room or
uncollected bottle
something,
deposits. And so they ended up putting like a couple million from that in. And then they tried, this is the part, it did not pass, but it passed the House, it did not pass finally. They tried to say, if we can't come up with something better, we'll increase the rooms and meals tax.
I know, I hated that.
And I was like, what are you doing?
Exactly.
I mean, I know that tourists come for clean water, so there's that connection, but you shouldn't be punishing a good thing. And down in Manchester, there's nothing we can do to clean up Lake Champlain. And you're going to raise taxes and affect our tourist industry in order to put the money in. And I was really angry, so I objected to that. And they did take it out. So there's no permanent solution. I think that the permanent solution has to be a connection with the polluting activities or the polluting materials. And this is a difficult thing because we have to face what's really going on. The stormwater runoff, the sources of pollution from that is going to be runoff from parking areas, runoff from agricultural fields, and some other kinds of things.
And our municipalities,
and the municipalities in their sewage. Let me tell you, every
seriously.
time 5 sewage overflow in Burlington, and you want my constituents to pay to clean up your lake, no, you got to clean that up. Now we're going to help them with that. We will help them with that. But they need to step up because they're the ones that the lake's on their doorstep and they're dumping poop in there. That's just, I'm sorry, that's like wrong.
No,
that's like wrong.
I was told today, I'm watching the clock because I want to talk about your campaign. I was told today that it's legal, something about their overflow. You should look into that. Their overflow, they can actually overflow without being illegal. Because I said to the people I had lunch, why aren't they being fined? And they said, well, what they're doing is legal. I said, don't even tell me that.
Well, and some of the overflows are largely treated, and there's just a small percentage of untreated. So it's not like it's raw sewage being dumped in. I mean, there are different kinds of overflows.
Because it's all about
and
if
it
there's
is
too
legal
much rain.
if there's too much rain. Because we built systems in a way that allowed that, and now it's a problem for us. So we have to work on the municipalities, definitely. We have to work on the other things. I think we need to put small taxes or fees on the purchase of chemical fertilizers, chemical herbicides, asphalt, gravel. And we need to say 3 years from now, we're going to put these small fees on this. And our intent is not to make you pay fees or taxes, but to get you to change your behavior. So you use less fertilizer. So you have buffer zones. So I know how hard the dairy industry is struggling. I don't want to make their lives any harder, but they have to take responsibility. And whatever substances are going into the lake, that has to stop. And the same thing for big developers. They need to make sure they have low impact designs for their parking areas. They need to use less asphalt, more grass. I mean, that's what we have to do. So my aim would be not just to raise revenue for Clean Water Fund, but just to get people to change their behavior. And in tax theory, the polluter pays. That is a well-established principle, but it's very difficult to do. But this is where you have to face reality. The idea that the whole state is going to pay to clean up when certain entities are allowing chemicals to enter the lake. That's not. It's not right.
It's a balance because I think
what is the right balance?
The state benefits from Lake Champlain.
Absolutely.
So there's sort of a little balance there.
Remember, the real problem there is we had really strong regulations in place for a long time. We didn't enforce them. So this is where you don't need new laws. You just need to
enforce the ones you've got. There's a concept.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you a little question about your last 6 years. What do you think is the greatest accomplishments, probably plural, accomplishments over those last 6 years that you're really proud of? I think you've mentioned one already, but just what kind of things would you look back and go, I did this, I did that?
Well, it's interesting in terms of actual things that got passed into law. Since we were just talking about clean water, I got them to make it that you can't get the current use property tax subsidy unless you're obeying accepted best management practices.
Whoa, there's a
because
great idea.
That was not happening. So in other words, we were giving them
money for
tax dollars, and they were not obeying. Yes, exactly. So and that got into law. I also got something in that you can't get other kinds of state grants without certifying that you're in good standing, you're not violating air pollution or water pollution. We had a system where a company could be doing something really destructive over here, and we're giving him money over here. So now there's a place where you have to certify. So I'm really proud of those things. I'm really proud of the income tax reform we just were talking about. But I think that in many ways what I'm most proud of is the times when I was able to change the conversation or add something to the conversation, and I can't always point to, okay, this particular law, but I put something in that they couldn't ignore. and I'm really proud of that. I know it was a very aggressive and controversial thing to do, and not all my constituents were glad that I did it. But I'm proud of trying to get Governor Shumlin to come up with the financial plan for single payer, because I don't believe government should promise people things that they aren't going to be able to fulfill, and that's what he and the legislature did. And then there was a date certain where he was supposed to produce the plan, and he did not.
I remember
and
this.
I felt that was just unacceptable. So even though he was in my party, I had to call that out. And if this governor starts putting child care and college costs in the education fund, I'll sue him about that.
Right.
So, and that's a credible threat because I did it before.
Yeah.
And I'm very proud of that. It was very difficult. I may have taken it too far, but that's what I think my obligation is to my constituents, to speak truth to power.
I think it gets frustrating and you just kind of get all involved in it, right? Because I remember when you did that with Shumlin, that was great. I was like, yes, Cynthia, just do it. So you're running again.
Yes.
It's your 7th time.
Yeah.
And you've got a couple of people, so you've got a primary, correct?
No, I don't really have a primary because remember it's a 2-seat district.
Oh, okay. So
there's right now, of course, people may come out of the woodwork, but right now there's one Republican and there are 2 Democrats.
Oh, I
so
see.
there are 2 slots.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
so there are 2 slots, and so most likely, unless something I don't understand happens, the 2 Democrats, myself, and the other candidate will move to the. So it'll be 3 people in November
for 2
slots. 2 seats. So it's the top 2 people that go in.
Oh, I see. Right.
Yeah.
So, and what is sort of the stump speech when you go out and talk to your constituents? What do you tell them? You should vote for me because.
You should vote for me because I understand how things work and don't work in Montpelier, and I can make state government work better for you.
That's great.
And I think it's because of understanding, particularly the budget and the tax code, well enough so that I can make it less dysfunctional. And I can make it, I insist that when we pass a law, it be based on the facts, not magical thinking, and that we need to enforce existing laws instead of passing new ones. And we need to stop having things at cross purposes, like subsidizing people over here and having them.
I love that example.
That's and so you have to be there long enough to understand those things and be able to find those. Because people are like, why don't we solve these problems? What we keep talking about economics. Why haven't we solved this problem? It's because things are at cross purposes. So that's what I try to say. I try to say, that I have a unique contribution as an economist to be able to sort those things out. But I think it's going to be a difficult campaign because the other candidates are good candidates, and so it'll be interesting to see how it comes out.
Because what I always think is wrong in the legislature is that you take an issue like childcare, and you look at it in a bubble, and you don't know how it impacts like those ripple effects. And so, of course you want to take care of children, and let's spend all the money we can, but if you don't have that institutional knowledge of, this means that this isn't going to get done, or this, you need somebody who can bring it all together and put it into perspective for you. Because, you're going to say, do you support childcare? Well,
of course we do.
You do.
Yes.
But you need to know what
it has to work.
Yeah,
it has to work.
Right.
And so I would like to say that I'm dedicated to developing policies that will actually work for Vermonters.
That's great.
And it isn't always what sounds good. Because what sounds good doesn't always work.
And I think next year you're going to, even last year you had new members, you had a new speaker, a new Senate Pro Tem, and a new governor, but there's a lot of people not running at all this year. So if you lose out on the institutional memory, those new people are going to be struggling. It's going to take them forever to get up to speed.
Yeah, and I think it's also hard because, the legislature has its own set of expertise, but the administration has sort of enduring permanent expertise. And so if you have a really new legislature, they can't always analyze things and get the right check and balance between those two branches, which I think is really important.
Yeah, and Donahue, Representative Donahue was on the show, and we were talking about institutional memory. She was talking particularly about mental health because she's got such a, but if you have new people, it just takes them, especially on taxes.
Oh, yeah.
How the heck you get somebody up to speed in the first week, and what are you doing? Give me a break. So I know you have a lot of passion about a couple of things: energy, I think education, and taxes. I think anything else that you really would like to see changed? Environmental protection, I think that's another one.
Yeah, I think the environmental protection is very important to me. Again, it has to be designed in a way it will work, but I think that the environment is the basis for all economic development and for all human health and for all of the wildlife and the habitat that we need. Down in my part of the state with the PFOA contamination,
of course.
it was not in my district.
Yeah.
Knock on wood,
Yeah, right.
so far. But I think everybody really got a wake-up call, because that was a form of chemical air pollution that went into the ground and became water pollution.
Right.
And people complained to the state at the time, and the state shut them down because, oh, it's the company, oh, it's jobs. We can't make it be either the environment or jobs. You have to be able to have both. If you don't have clean water, you have nothing.
Right.
And so that's why we need to clean up Lake Champlain, but it's why we need to be sure that companies never do that again.
Right.
They're held
right.
responsible for
And
it.
I think that's right. It's not either or. You've got to find a way
What's the
to
balance?
have a balance.
Prevention.
Because I think people that move here want to be in our environment.
That's right.
So if you mess up the environment, and
That's right.
what was that song about paving over?
Pave paradise.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Put up a parking lot.
Yes.
That won't serve us because
No.
people won't move here.
That's right.
Yeah, I agree
That's right.
with you.
And
but-
I also, in my regular life, I'm the executive director of the Bat and Kill Watershed Alliance.
you still are
which is
doing that?
Yes,
Oh.
which is a river group. We restore river habitat, and I have myself planted thousands of trees on the banks of the Bat and Kill and the tributaries, which is exactly what should be happening on the tributaries to Lake Champlain. So I put my money where my mouth is. I am engaged in environmental protection.
I didn't think you were
all the
doing
time.
that
Yes.
again. Oh, good
Yes.
for you.
Yes.
That's great. Excellent. So, when you're in the legislature for 6 years, you reach out to your public a lot, to your constituents, not public, to your because I think you have some Saturday, come meet me
Yes.
at
Yes.
the restaurant sort of thing. And
Yes.
You're very good at emails, and your website's excellent. And so you're always out there, are you?
Well,
not?
I'm updating my website now so that it's, I don't know that it's excellent. It didn't have the ability to post enough, so I'm updating it so that I can post more reports. And so I'm trying to update that. I do have legislative office hours over breakfast at Chauncey's Restaurant
Great.
on Route 7A in Arlington every Saturday, 8 to 9:30. I wouldn't say that many people always come. I have some regulars. Sometimes people are coming to have breakfast, and then they see me and they come over and
right,
talk.
right.
So, it's not like I always have a crowd.
But they
I
know
don't.
you're out there.
But they know I'm there. I go to the Bennington County Democratic meeting. I go to the Bennington County Republican meeting.
Good for you.
And people can call me. I'm on the Arlington Select Board. I think I'm not as good with I try to answer emails, but I'm not as good with email blasts and things as I might be. But I'm going to try to get better about that. But I'm very accessible. People call up and they'll think I'm my secretary. They're like, is this Representative Browning's staff? I'm like,
right.
no
Staff?
staff. There's no staff.
What is
it's
that?
like,
Well, I think it's cute because you always do pictures of the State House. The things that you're surrounded by.
Yeah.
You'll always, and I think that's cool. Just adds a little flavor of where our legislators are and what they're looking at, and the chandelier in the house, and I think.
well, and I think that you may not realize this because you live so close to Montpelier and you worked in state government as well as being in legislature. But down in my
they don't
part,
know.
they haven't even always been to the State House.
Right.
A lot of them come up when they're kids, with school. But many of them haven't been here, and they don't know where I am. They don't know what I'm doing. So it's really important
great.
for me.
Great.
Sometimes they'll see me on the news, and they'll be like, "Oh, I saw you on the news." It's like they didn't think I was really here. It's like they saw me on the news.
When I was Commissioner of Motor Vehicles, I made it mandatory that all new employees go over to the legislature. And a lot of times I would take them over and do the tour myself. And they were a nervous wreck to go to the State House. I said, this is your house.
This is your house, yes.
And so while we're sitting there getting beat up by the public, I said, you should at least know why we're here. And you look across the street at the State House. And I think they appreciated that because I made them know why we were here.
Good. I think that's
So
good.
I think that. So is there anything you would like to tell your constituents about next year and some ideas and why they should vote for you? Because
Sure.
Yeah.
I think, first of all, the website is going to be www.cynthiabrowning.com. I'm on Facebook. I'm in the phone book. I'm in the legislative listing. So people can contact me. I really need comments, criticisms, suggestions. I have a whole legislative report, 4 pages legislative report on the bills that passed, not
great,
everything,
great.
but a lot of them.
Good.
That gives what happened, and then sometimes I'll give my opinion, and it's clear what's my opinion and what's not my opinion.
great.
So I have a whole report. People can request that report. I can send it to them by regular mail or by email. And I would just like people to reach out to me. I'll be going door to door. I'll be going to meetings. And I just need to hear from people and have a chance to tell them what I've been
You
doing.
post in the Manchester Journal sometimes,
Yeah,
too,
we
right?
have regular
Yeah.
columns in the Manchester Journal during the session, and I've worked really hard on those, and it's a
Great.
good way to keep in touch. But I think right now, what I would want a voter to be thinking about is to have someone who knows how things work so they will have a chance to fix it, partly because they're an independent thinker, because I'm not just going to do what I'm told
Right.
and do according to political rhetoric, because political rhetoric doesn't always work on the ground.
Right.
And I'm dedicated to things that will work for Vermonters, and I think
great.
that's why I deserve their vote.
And she really means it, people.
Yes.
You do. Cynthia, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you for having
Excellent.
me.
You're
Thank you.
wonderful as always. So thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next week, and in the meantime, keep listening beyond the sound bites.